Hello and welcome to the Film Pulse Podcast. This is episode number 387. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today, we got Kevin Rakestraw. Hey, Kevin.
Hi.
This week on the show, we'll be taking a look at Alex Winter's new documentary, Zappa, along with someone watching on the watch list and going over this week's new releases on VOD and Blu-ray. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please remember to review us on iTunes if you get a moment. That would be very helpful. Just a couple housekeeping bits. Really just one. This month's Saved by the 90s is going to be recorded on Monday, and I hope to have it out shortly thereafter. The holidays are going to get in the way a little bit, but hopefully not hinder my editing schedule too much. I hope everyone is remaining safe this Thanksgiving. Maybe have a Thanksgiving at home, maybe a virtual Thanksgiving. Use that Zoom to meet with your family instead of traveling, because it's going to be a rough one.
Yeah.
I think we can get into our review here. We're talking about Zappa. I have a synopsis here, an in-depth look at the life and work of musician Frank Zappa. This is written and directed by Alex Winter, who, you probably know him from the Bill and Ted movies, but he is also a really good documentarian. He's done some technology-related documentaries in the past. He did Trust Machine, the story of blockchain, which takes a look at the rise of cryptocurrency, and he did the Panama Papers, which I didn't see, but I really do want to see that, because I think the Panama Papers is a very interesting subject. So I would like to catch his documentary on that. He also did a documentary on child actors called Showbiz Kids, and I haven't seen that either, but I'd like to see that too. So anyway, Now Kevin, you're a huge Zappa head. You love the music of Frank Zappa. I remember when we were young.
Oh, yeah.
When we were young, you'd be bumping Zappa in the car on the way to school.
Just always picking up those Zappa albums at Borders. Now
I had several family members who were really into Frank Zappa, so I was exposed to his music at a fairly early age, and I think I like him and his principles and his creativity and really his genius more than the actual music itself. So we'll start out with you, Kevin, since you're much more of a fan and probably knew a whole lot more about him than me going into this. So what were your initial impressions of this documentary?
My initial impressions are, first off, this is a very well made documentary. It had a lot of what I was hoping for because, like you said, I am a big Zappa fan. I've read biographies of Zappa. So I know a lot about his history, like the beginning days. I know about him being arrested for quote unquote pornography and a lot of those tidbits, and him being obsessed with that fairly obscure composer and that kind of catapulting him into music. So I knew a lot of that stuff. So I was a little bit trepidatious going into Zappa because I'm kind of thinking what am I going to get that I already don't know? You know what I mean? And I was very surprised right off the bat that this is he got access to the vaults, and it's just a plethora of archival footage, which is just yes, okay, I don't have access to that, never did, and probably never would, except for this movie. So that's fantastic. That's pretty much the only way you could do, for me, a Zappa documentary and make it be worthwhile.
Yeah, so he has so Frank Zappa kept a giant archive of pretty much everything that he ever did. So all of the music. So he had, the dude was so prolific. He was just creating every day, just churning out song after song, album after album, and he has this enormous archive, and he recorded all of the concerts that he did and everything too. So you have this enormous archive of stuff, and a lot of it has gone unreleased, and a lot of it's never been seen before. So there's a lot of really great footage in this movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And he recorded and documented pretty much everything. I mean, it's wild to think that he has, recordings of him and Eric Clapton just because Clapton
Yeah.
decided to show up at his house one day.
And
But, like, who knows what the hell's in that vault?
yeah. And like Jimi Hendrix and all, it's just so much stuff in there. And it's also crazy how many like posthumous releases have come out since he passed away. Like, was it like?
Oh yeah,
I was like more albums have been released since he died than when he was alive, I think, or close to it.
It's either more or equal. Which, when you see the vault, it makes sense because you're just like, holy shit, there's probably like 200 fucking albums in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the movie they say, but I can't remember exactly, but I think all in all, there's been like maybe close to 120 albums released. So I mean, it's just a massive discography.
Yeah, and like I think like 60 some of those he released while he was alive. Which again, like he was a very prolific guy from the 60s until his death. Like he did a ton of stuff, and it's extremely varied, which is I think is kind of the difficult thing for anyone trying to categorize themselves as a Zappa fan or like being into his music, because his music is so widely varied.
Later on in his career, he pretty much just becomes a composer, and a lot of his music later on was more orchestral in sound, like this sort of experimental orchestral stuff. And I could understand why people might not gravitate towards that compared to like, Valley Girl or whatever.
Yeah, because he's got the funny songs. He's got even like his very, very early albums. It can be like a regular rhythm and blues song. It could be a regular like doo-wop song, and then the next song could be this like freak out free jazz type thing, and then like even one album can be like 17 different styles of music.
Yeah,
so it's really hard to be like, I'm in the mood for this specifically.
Yeah, you go to his Spotify page and hit random, and you are going to get a lot of random. It's just going to be all over the place. You're going to get hit with that like psychedelic stuff from the 60s where he was, sort of lumped into this psychedelic bands, even though he hated drugs. He was very anti-drug, which I don't know if I ever really knew that about him, that he was pretty straight edge.
Yeah, which is it's weird, but it also kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
because it's just like, of course he would be.
I just think it's so impressive when you obviously in this documentary you hear tons and tons of his songs and the various projects that he was a part of, so you get a really good idea of his musical talent, his abilities, and just the insane amount of creativity he brought to the medium. And like the fact that he was completely self-taught, like he just went to the library, started reading books, and just learned just on his own, completely just learned how to do it all. So even in the 90s when he was like using that crazy that computer thing, that thing looked really overwhelming.
Yeah, and he just taught himself, and it's not just like, he taught himself how to play the guitar, which is, there's been plenty of guitar players that have done that. Hendrix has done it, where it's like, oh man, that's pretty impressive. But the fact that it's not only just him with the guitar, it's the drums, it's writing and composing orchestral music that he was doing in high school, like the high school orchestra was playing, and composing films and just all this stuff that he was doing, and essentially creating, not necessarily creating, but kind of expanding upon like musical theater, where like a live show was actually like a live show, where it was more than just those guys playing a song. It was the whole thing with props and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it was definitely like a performance. Like he had dancers. Yeah, like it was like musical theater for sure. One thing that I liked about the documentary, it was, and you touched on this already, where they talk about when he was arrested, when he was he was basically living at a recording studio, and he was essentially tricked into making this tape that was supposed to be like people having sex on the tape, but it wasn't that. But he ended up getting arrested and going to jail for like 6 months because of it. And the fact that they go over that, and then they go over a lot of the other aspects of his career, the composer that he sort of became enamored with, and how it's very clear that, you know, these were the events in his life that set in motion where his career was going to go and where his life was going to go. And I thought that Winter did a really good job of putting those little breadcrumbs in there so that you can sort of you can very clearly see the trajectory of his life and career. I thought he did a really good job with the structure and just organizing everything in the documentary in a it's a fairly straightforward way, but he does it it's not like a completely straight timeline necessarily either. He throws in a lot of entertaining tidbits.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things that I really appreciated and enjoyed is talking to a lot of the former band members, the people that played with him, kind of giving you a more well-rounded, you know, what this guy was about. Because I didn't really know so much of him being kind of this workaholic. I mean, I figured he was, just considering the output, but the way in which he dealt with people too, where he seemed like he was a huge asshole.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Like, he was just a really cold person and just demanded. And they even got into that like towards the end, and that's the reason he ended up buying this computerized music machine, is because he didn't think musicians could play the stuff that he was writing, which is really fucking self-centered. Like, give me a break, dude.
That was kind of a through line through a lot of his decisions. Like when he started doing the composing stuff, and how like he would frequently say like, I don't think that any of this work that I'm doing here is going to see the light of day, because I don't think any of these musicians can do it. Like he was in interviews saying as much, like how he would buy, you know, rehearsal time, and a lot of these like big orchestras and stuff would allow him like 2 days of rehearsal time, and it wasn't enough to achieve the level of perfection that he wanted with these very complex pieces.
And I think that was interesting as well, because so much of it was like him being very cold, very demanding, and like, again, he was struggling with that, where he didn't think people could do it, and God, I can't, you know, put my trust into other people and all this stuff. And it's just like, well, maybe if you like weren't such an asshole, like maybe if you were more, you know, if you were more open with people, you know, more tender with people, you know, took a different approach, maybe the outcome would be different. You know,
he definitely in a lot of ways he reminded me of Steve Jobs, because I think that Steve Jobs is notably a very similar way, where they're this like sort of creative genius, and they have very particular expectations, and you better meet those expectations or you're going to hit the pavement. And I think that there's probably a lot of other, you know, sort of prodigious people that you could say the same thing about.
Yeah. And the thing that's difficult is those people, and, you know, Zappa in particular, like Zappa created a ton of stuff, and a lot of it's great. You know, like he made so much stuff. He's a very prolific guy, a lot of different ideas. He's you know, really innovative in terms of recording and editing and sound manipulation, like all these things that people can point to and be like, this guy, you know, he was different, and he created so much. And it's like, it's tough to go up against that and be like, yeah, but what could he have done? Like, what more could he have made if he was a more collaborative person? You know what I mean? If he was more open with the people that he was working with, it could be something even more spectacular than what we got in the short time that he was here.
Yeah, because I mean, they say in the movie, like he did not respond to like suggestions or anything like that or new ideas. Like this was completely his show. What he said is that was it. Like that was the final.
Yeah.
That was it. So yeah, it seems like he was probably a really tough dude to be close to. I mean, even his wife. I mean, she's interviewed in this movie, and that she just had to kind of go along with it. Now, I'm actually surprised that they remained together until his death.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was a little strange was the fact that, you know, they talk about his kids, but they're not in the movie at all, which I thought was strange because at first I'm like, oh, maybe they thought they didn't really have anything to say, but I would really like to know more about what his home life was like when he was home. What was that like?
I think they did touch on that a little bit. Is that it wasn't even when he was home, he wasn't there.
Right, he was in his little home studio.
Yeah, which I didn't realize with the Valley Girl tidbit.
Yeah,
you know, his biggest single,
his only hit. He was a one-hit wonder.
His only hit with his daughter comes out from her sliding a note under the recording studio door, saying like, "Hello, let me introduce myself. I'm your daughter. I never see you." And what does he do immediately? He's like, "Oh, okay, well, let's write a song together." It's like, you can't do something else besides that.
Yeah, it's kind of
music. Like, my God,
it's kind of sad. I mean,
it's sad.
So yeah, I would like to have seen more interviews, at least some interviews with the kids, which I'm not even sure why. Because at first I was like, well, maybe they just didn't want to do it, but Ahmed Zappa was a producer on this movie, and their mom is in it. So I'm not really sure why they wouldn't be a part of it.
Now, one other thing that I really appreciated with this, because I've seen a number of, not really Zappa documentaries, but, you know, like little tidbits of Zappa. And one of the things that always seems to take up so much of the discussion in and around Zappa is the him testifying
the Senate
to Congress.
The Senate hearings.
The Senate hearings, like that always takes up so much. And I was really happy that although Alex Winter does touch upon it here, he does bring it up, and there is some things, it doesn't dominate the documentary.
Right. I was afraid that it was gonna be more involved with that aspect because, you know, as I said, I don't know a whole lot about him, but I do know that. I mean, that is like the one thing I know a lot about because of, you know, the fallout from that with the parental advisory stuff. And I knew that he was a big sort of outspoken player during those hearings and stuff. And he was one of the only ones. I mean, nobody else really got involved in it. One of the things that I didn't actually know was that they weren't going after him to begin with. Like he saw it as his duty to stand up for free speech, but they weren't. I was always kind of under the impression that because he was so involved and he was sort of the spokesperson for the music industry, that I thought that they were going after him. And I learned from this documentary that they weren't. But he looked at it as like it was his duty to protect the First Amendment. And I think that Alex Winter he touches on it enough to give us the information. But again, what this leads to is him being involved in the Velvet Revolution and becoming like, I didn't know that either. Like how he becomes like an envoy for the United States and the Czech, was it Czechoslovakia? Was it the Czech Republic?
Yeah,
I'm so bad with history.
Which is so funny to me because the number of times that I've seen this discussed, and again, that was where I was kind of worried about when it did come up. Essentially when it came up in the movie, once we got to that part of the timeline, I was thinking like, okay, well, I'm done with this movie because I'm so sick and tired of hearing about, you know, the Senate hearings and him testifying and all this stuff. You know, I know all that stuff. But then you get the tidbits of the Czech Republic and him being like the cultural like ambassador or whatever, and the fact that the what was it, Senator Baker, essentially wanted Czechoslovakia and was like, okay, if you want any help from America
Yeah,
and you want to,
you gotta
you know,
let
just
you gotta
you
dump
as a
this
sovereign
guy.
nation, you got to get this guy out of here. And I'm like, that's like the biggest thing from this whole thing. And like, I didn't know that. Like the other, 27 times that I've seen footage or, little documentaries or whatnot about these Senate hearings, like, why was that never brought up? Like, how did I not know about the Czech Republic stuff?
Yeah, I mean that was a much bigger deal because you could infer that he had a hand in that revolution and helped bring democracy to them.
Well, and I love the fact that he didn't really know until he got there.
He didn't know how like he was like wildly famous there, like way more famous there than probably in the United States.
Yeah, like they were obsessed with him. Like he was essentially like their like symbol of
Mm-hmm.
freedom. Like that they were fighting for Frank Zappa music, and he had no, he's in another country just composing and ignoring his kids and whatnot. It's like this whole country that's trying to get democracy is obsessed with you, and you don't know, which is just wild to me.
Yeah, overall, I think it was a really good, well-made documentary. I liked the animated, the claymation stuff in it as well.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about all the claymation stuff that he did.
One thing, and one just this is like a completely side note thing. I didn't know that at one point he had formed a band with the Turtles, and
Oh yeah.
the
Oh, you
one
don't remember that? I had that CD. We would play that shit all the time when we go to
I don't think I knew.
fucking Danny's.
I just don't think I knew that it was the Turtles. Like I know the songs, but I just don't think that
Oh, okay.
I realized that it was the guys from the Turtles. And the one dude from the Turtles,
Yeah.
every time that they would show the one guy from the Turtles, I would think that he doesn't look like he belongs in that time period. Like he looks like he is a modern guy. Like
I love that whole, for some reason, that whole era of Zappa is just so intriguing to me. Just the whole Turtles element. First, those two guys don't look like they should ever be in the band The Turtles
yeah.
or have written the songs that they've written. And then to come out of that band and immediately join up with Frank Zappa and start another, Mothers of Invention, it's just so weird. It's such two weird guys. It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense to me.
I wish he did more collaborations with other artists and stuff throughout his career because I think he could have made some really cool, unique things if he did more collabs.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I thought was kind of surprising because he with this documentary is like he did a ton of stuff with Captain Beefheart, and the fact that him and Captain Beefheart were teenage friends, and like that was kind of like touched upon like in the early days, like hey, these guys became friends together and they got kind of obsessed with music, and then that was kind of it. Wasn't really discussed anymore, which that was like a big thing.
Yeah, they do mention it like
working together.
Yeah, they mentioned it like one other time when they were talking about him like bringing back a lot of the people that he used to work with. So like there was a situation that happened where it's like a bad tour or something where he ended up losing a whole bunch of money because of the tour, and like he paid all the artists, but then he sort of disbanded the band and kind of went out on his own. But then like later on he started pulling back in a lot of the musicians that he used, including Captain Beefheart.
Yeah, because they did a ton of stuff together.
Well, there you have it. That is Zappa. That is going to be available on VOD platforms on the 27th, so Friday. So definitely check it out. I mean, I like pretty much. I'm a rock doc guy, so this was definitely right up my alley, and it was really well made too. That's the thing that needs to be pointed out.
It's extremely comprehensive. Like he pretty much covers.
Yeah, like everything, pretty much everything. Yeah.
Pretty much everything.
is the
So
definitive
yeah,
documentary on Zappa. So,
yeah,
all right, what are you going to give Zappa out of 10?
I give Zappa an 8.
Nice. I'm sitting right there with you. I'm into like 7.5, 8 for me. There's very few like criticisms I have with this. It's fairly straightforward, comprehensive documentary. It looks really good. He got a lot of people involved, and just to reiterate, like you had already mentioned this about how he talks to a lot of the former band members, but one of the things that I appreciated that is that he highlighted the band members. He didn't just like kind of show them, but he like had title cards for them and he named them and he showed them, like he showed us what they did, so they weren't just these like kind of background players, where he
Yeah,
actually
and
spent time.
when he would show like the archival footage, he would focus in on them,
Yeah,
so you could get a sense of them at that time back in 69 or 68,
yeah.
whatever the time period was.
He made sure that these people were recognized for the work that they did and that they weren't just background players. I mean, I think that that's something that should be recognized with Zappa's music, is that yes, he was like a creative genius and he wrote all this music and stuff like that, but he had to have a great band to back him up, and I think that this documentary does a really good job of acknowledging that. So major props to Alex Winter. I think that he is doing really, really great work with his directorial efforts. So I'm excited to see what he's got cooking up next. All right, moving on. Let's talk about something we're watching. Kevin, I think it's your turn this week.
Ooh, watch out. I watched The Plumber from 1979. This is a Peter Weir movie, Australian, kind of like a little, somewhat of a like containment thriller type thing. That doesn't really accurately describe it, but it's a short film, 77 minutes. It's really compact, economical, and to me, it was just really great. And it's really simple. This young couple live on campus. They have this little apartment, this little flat that they're living in. He's a teacher, researcher, all that stuff. So he's always gone. He goes for the day and he's doing his stuff and he's doing his research, and people are coming from Switzerland. He's all, he's all wrapped up in his work that he's doing. There's an opportunity here for him. And his girlfriend or his wife is staying at home and working on her own like research project. And this guy just shows up one day and he's like, I'm the plumber. I'm here to check your pipes. Got to check all the pipes, right? Thing is, no one called a plumber. They don't know what the hell's going on, but they're like, fine, whatever. Come in and check out the pipes. Well, this guy just stays. Like he just stays, and he's kind of weird. It's kind of creepy. He seems a little off, right? So, and that's the thing. He just keeps showing up every day because he's like, oh, I have to fix all your pipes. And you're never quite sure where the movie's going to go, because of course she's trepidatious of the whole thing. She doesn't like it. Of course, her husband's like, oh well, whatever. He's the plumber. Just let him do his thing. Of course, because he's not there, he doesn't know. He doesn't care. And this guy is, like the worst plumber that's ever existed. And he just like completely destroys their entire bathroom. Just like rips all the walls out, and like they can't get rid of this guy. And but it goes through some interesting places, namely kind of like class expectations and how people see each other. Because of course the plumber sees the wife in a certain light, and of course the wife sees the plumber in a certain light, and there's kind of a power play between the two of them. And the whole role of like the antagonist of this movie is kind of blurred, and it kind of switches from scene to scene as who's being awful to whom. And it's I was quite surprised by this movie. It's very enjoyable.
Okay.
Great.
I'm gonna have to check
And
that
this
out.
is on Criterion.
Nice. That's The Plumber from Peter Weir. I saw another documentary called Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist. This is available on Shudder. Came out this week. This is directed by Alexander O. Philippe, who he previously did the Memory Origins of Alien movie that came out last year. and he did that 7852 movie, which took a look at the shower scene in Psycho. So this is a guy who, and he also did Dock of the Dead. So he's a documentary filmmaker who definitely specializes in very specific subjects in cinema. So this is a very simple, straightforward documentary. It's literally just William Friedkin in a room talking about The Exorcist, and that's exactly what it is. It's just him. It's almost like a visual audio commentary in a lot of ways. He doesn't he doesn't go through the whole movie like the timeline, like scene by scene from start to finish or anything. He just sort of really just they point a camera at him and they're like, hey, talk about The Exorcist, and then William Friedkin just goes on for like an hour and a half. He just goes on and on and on. Like, I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of like editing involved, but the way that it plays out, it's just like this crazy stream of consciousness where Friedkin just talks about The Exorcist nonstop. It's good. There's a lot of like fun little tidbits. I mean, I love The Exorcist, but I wasn't the type of person who watched, documentaries on it or video essays or anything like that. I don't know if there is an audio commentary, but if there is, I never listened to it. So I didn't know like a ton about the making of it. So there was a lot of fun little like anecdotes and things in here that Friedkin talks about that I didn't know. Like, for instance, he would randomly shoot a gun. He had a gun on set, and anytime he wanted to get a reaction shot out of somebody, he would just randomly shoot the gun while they were shooting the scene to get these like startled reaction shots from people, which I'm not sure how that would really track today. Don't know if that would be allowed today, but
yeah.
He definitely...
I would hope not.
Yeah, he definitely did it back then. Stacy Keach was originally going to be playing the lead role, which I thought was kind of interesting. He was going to be the priest.
Oh, okay.
Instead of Jason Miller. So I thought that was kind of a interesting little tidbit. The other thing is, like, a lot of people talk about the symbolism in The Exorcist and the various metaphors that it may contain. And like right off the bat, Friedkin was just like, he's like, I've seen people talk about the different meanings behind some of my scenes in The Exorcist. He's like, I didn't intend for any of that. He's like, he's like, there was no symbolism. There was no metaphor in The Exorcist. He's like, I just made a movie, and if it felt right, I did it.
That's what I love about art in so many different ways. Is there's so many people that do that. They try and track out all these metaphors and all this symbolism. And majority of the time, when someone's asked about it, the person that makes it, they're just like, yeah, I didn't intend for any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting kind of watching this movie and the Zappa documentary in very close proximity, because you can see a lot of the same sort of
I was just thinking of that too, because they kept asking Zappa about, like him hiring these orchestras and stuff, and he just put it out very plainly. He's like, I want to record the music that I make so that I can hear it, so I can take it home and I can listen to it. If other people want to listen to it, cool, I'll let them. And that's it. Like, it wasn't any more complicated than that.
And with Friedkin, like, I mean, I think the dude is a genius at his profession. I think that he is one of the greats. But at the same time, you're like, is he just kind of bullshitting a lot of the stuff that he's saying? Like, you never really know. But a lot of the stuff that he did in this movie, he was just like, yeah, it felt right. Like, it just seemed like the right thing to do. I got a feeling like this is what I need to do. And, he got lucky and it all turned out just peachy for him. But I mean, the fact that he like the music was a big thing, where he talks about finding the right music and stuff, and they were hiring the composers, and then like it never worked, and then finally he like just happened to hear like the Tubular Bells song, was like, oh, there it is, that's the one. And then like he was watching some old movies, and they were trying to figure out how they could handle the the possessed voice. So Reagan's, after she gets possessed, like what were they going to do with her voice? Because they wanted to change it, but they didn't want to give it like a man's voice. They wanted it to still sound somewhat like she was maybe in there, but they couldn't use her voice because when they shot the movie, they did actually have Linda Blair speaking all the lines, but and this is kind of the cool thing, like they show the scenes without the voice, so it's just like Linda Blair saying the stuff, and it's just it feels so different when you just hear this like little girl saying these things. So he was watching like these old movies, and he was watching a movie starring Mercedes McCambridge, and he was just like, that's the perfect voice. And so he tracked her down, and she was retired by this point, and she agreed to do it, but she was like, okay, just so you know, like, I'm an alcoholic, I got a lot of problems, so I'm going to have a lot of very strict stipulations in order for me to do this. And she required that during the recording sessions, they tie her to a chair. They have to give her booze and cigarettes and raw eggs for her to consume before they do the recording so that she could get her voice right. And then she required that they have 2 priests on hand so that every time they would do a recording session, she would then go and like pray and stuff with the priests. And he did it. Friedkin was like, yeah, sure. Let's go for it. And then that's the voice that you get. It's actually Mercedes McCambridge. So lots of really fun little things in this movie. If you're a huge fan of The Exorcist, I think that there's a lot to be learned here. And I think that anytime you have the camera in front of William Friedkin, he's like one of these directors that can just talk forever, and he has a lot of really interesting stories. So he's kind of an endearing guy to begin with. And, you know, he's getting older. He's like in his 80s now. So I think that this is a good movie just to be made in general as sort of a hit, just to have, you know, for history's sake. So I do give it a light recommendation. If you don't love The Exorcist, then I don't know why you would ever watch this, because like I said, it's just a very stripped down documentary that pretty much just it does contain like a lot of behind the scenes footage and stuff like that, but it's just William Friedkin talking. So again, it's on Shudder. So if you have Shudder, I could give it a look.
Sure. All right. Another one from the Criterion Channel. That's Mike Leigh's High Hopes from 1988. This is an early Mike Leigh movie, which it is pretty much exactly what I want, you know, when I sit down and think to myself, I want to watch a Mike Leigh movie. This is it. It has Ruth Sheen, so you're already pretty much there. And it's a slice of life little dramedy, you know, and it's phenomenal. I absolutely adored it. It's funny at times. It's just a really comforting watch. It's, you know, really enjoyable people up on the screen, except for a couple characters, because this is all based around Shirley and Cyril. They're this working class couple, and they have a nice relationships. Cyril is like he's a socialist, and he's a little bit cold, and you know he's kind of down in the dumps in terms of how everything's going. He's kind of a pessimistic guy. Shirley's trying to keep, you know, everything going. She wants to have a baby. He doesn't. His mother's getting old and starting to show the signs of Alzheimer's, and he's not entirely sure what to do. And Shirley's the one that kind of takes care of things. But Cyril's sister, Valerie, in this movie is perhaps one of the most insufferable characters I've had the displeasure of watching. Luckily, she doesn't ruin the movie, but she has a laugh in the way in which she speaks too that are just the most grating and irritating sounds that I've heard in quite some time. But outside of that, it's pretty much a perfect movie. a
Nice.
little bit of comedy in there, just like the perfect little touches here and there, perfectly timed. And then, it still has these like really heartbreaking moments that are happening, like couched within these kind of like silly moments as well.
So
The
Mike
way in which he
Mike
handles
Lee
all.
movie basically is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's an early one, and you can tell that it's a little rough. It's not as polished as his later offerings, but because of that, it's almost a little bit more endearing in a way.
Okay, I'll have to give this a look at some point. I've been meaning to dive into some more Mike Lee stuff, but I just haven't been in the right mindset.
And that's the thing. Let me assure you, whether you're in the right mindset or not, just do it because it's going to put you in the right one.
Okay.
Which is the thing that I always learn when I watch a Mike Lee movie. Like, it's always something that I didn't know I needed at the time, but it was exactly what I needed. And I always come away with the realization of like, why am I not watching more like Mike Lee movies? Why am I not doing this more often?
All right. Again, that is High Hopes, and it's available on the Criterion Channel. I saw The Dark and the Wicked. This is directed by Brian Bertino. This is another one of these kind of modern folk horror, Ari Aster style movies that I think probably Hereditary had something to do with the proliferation of this style of horror movie. I don't know if, obviously Hereditary wasn't the first one, but I think that it definitely had enough success that it started a trend. And this one is about a woman and her brother who go back home to visit their parents who their father is dying. He's in sort of a hospice care situation and he's slowly dying. But something seems off about their mom, and she does something pretty horrific and then ends up dying as well. And they start to realize like there's something very dark in this house. And it's kind of it kind of brings an interesting twist on it where it's sort of a haunted house movie, but at the same time, like they can't leave the house because it turns out that like, their dad is too sick to move. So they can't take him to a hospital. Like they have doctors come over and they try to get him to a hospital, but the doctor's like, he can't be moved. He wouldn't live for the like to take him to the hospital. So none of the doctors would sign off on moving him. So they pretty much had to stay in the house. And even though they knew, like by this point, they'd started seeing really horrific things and what happened with their mom, and like they knew that something very awful was happening here, but they just couldn't leave, him. They couldn't leave him. So things escalate and get very, very dire. It's a very bleak, dark movie. It's pretty scary. I saw this like a week or two after we had talked about His House, and I said that was the scariest movie I'd seen this year, and this one's right up there. I mean, there's some really horrific imagery in this that is very disturbing. It's a fairly well made movie. Where it goes, it doesn't feel entirely new. I wasn't particularly impressed with the final act and how it ended, but there's still something here, and I would give it a light recommendation. This is on VOD right now, and it's going to be on Shudder, I think, in December. It is a Shudder original, but it was one of these deals that, like some of the Shudder stuff, they'll like release on VOD first, and then like the bigger ones, they seem to release in like theaters and VOD first, and then they like they did that with Color Out of Space, I believe.
Yeah.
Or maybe was Mandy might be a Shudder one too. I'm not sure, but yeah. Anyway, it's on VOD, so you can check it out. And yeah, again, light recommend. But just know going into it that it is very, very bleak. It's not a very fun horror movie.
Gotcha. The only other one I'll talk about here is Ham on Rye. This is an American indie from Tyler Termina. And this is one that starts off rather well, right? It's kind of this bizarre. It's tough to describe, but essentially, it's just like the first half of this movie just kind of shuffles between these, like, it's almost like 7 or 8 groups of like teenagers, and they're getting all dressed up, and they're kind of making this pilgrimage to what turns out to be this like deli. They're all going to this deli, and they're all talking about like what's going to be happening that day, and this and that, and but it's all spoken about in a very like cryptic way that you're not entirely sure what's going on here. What are they going to? What is the purpose of this? Why are they all dressed up? What's happening exactly? But you do get the sense from their parents that are kind of like shuffling them off, is that this is really, really important. This is a huge day for them. They can't fuck it up. So the first half of this movie for me worked really great because there's this nice build up. You're switching between all these characters. It's got some wonderful visuals to it, and just like the pace of it overall is just rather enjoyable. And there's the mystery aspect of what the hell is going to happen. This is a peculiar movie, so it could be anything, right? So they get there. It's this bizarre kind of like rite of passage that they're kind of like coupled up, and then they're off. They get to leave. They get to leave this small town, and essentially that's what this movie becomes, because the second half of the movie focuses on the kids that didn't get coupled up with anyone. No one was really interested in them, so they got left behind, and now they're like permanent locals in this small shitty town, that happens, every year across the country. You have these little towns where, people graduate and they don't make it out, and they just stay here for the rest of their lives. So it kind of like, that's what it's kind of commenting on, right? Which is, it's an interesting concept. I like the ideas behind it, but it doesn't make up for the fact that the second half of this movie is just like people in this small town doing nothing, just wandering around aimlessly, just not really doing anything. And I'm sorry, but it's extremely boring to watch the second half of this movie. I wasn't into it at all. Like, it just, all the wind came out of the sails, where it's just like, okay, I get it. All right. Do we have to keep going? Can't we wrap this up?
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I don't like vehemently say that I'm against like proposing it, like, hey, you should go out and watch this. I think this is one of those things where it could go anywhere for you. So if that sounded interesting to you, definitely check it out. You might be surprised, or you might come away with it like me, where it's like, okay, I like the ideas there, and I like parts of this movie, but overall it was just a bit too mundane, if you will.
Okay, that's Ham on Rye. I know that Factory 25 put this out. How did you see this?
Yes, if you go to Factory 25's website, they're like virtual cinema type thing. I think there's like a page on their website or whatever, and you can do your, get a ticket for a theater or whatever.
The last one that I'll mention is called Blood Vessel. This is directed by Justin Dix. This is also on Shudder. Takes place near the end of World War II, and you have the survivors of this hospital ship. They're on a lifeboat. They're running out of rations. They have no water. They're about to die. And then they see this Nazi ship in the distance, and they're like, well, you know what? I mean, this sucks, but gotta get on there. I mean, it's better to get shot by a Nazi than slowly die of starvation. So they board the ship, and they realize that there's like nobody on board. It seems to be deserted. So they start exploring.
Oh, boy.
They start exploring around, and they start to find some dead bodies that are like pretty hideously devoured. Like there's this really weird like vein thing that's happening where there's like veins, all like external veins all over them. They're like spreading up the walls and stuff. It's really creepy looking. As they explore, they discover that there's some kind of occult things happening here, and they find out that there's some vampires. There's a family of vampires on board this ship, and they, of course, they wake up the vampires, and then they got to fight the vampires, and it's okay. Like there were, it's fairly poorly made. I like some of the lighting aspects are decent. The setting itself looks pretty good. Like, I don't know if they shot this like on an actual ship, but it looks that looks pretty good. The acting is pretty bad. The writing is pretty bad. You have this like cast of characters who are supposed to be this sort of even spread of, World War II archetypes. So you have like a Russian sniper, you have this British intelligence guy, you have a British medic, and you have an American like GI type, grizzled GI type, and then you have like a cook, and he's like from Brooklyn. He's like this sassy Brooklyn cook. So you have like these archetypes, and it's just a little bit too on the nose with that. There is some fun to be had here. I actually didn't really like. So the creature design looks good, but I just didn't particularly like it. Like the vampires look like just giant bats, and I just didn't really like the design of them. So overall, I thought, not great. Comparing it to other like World War II horror movies, which I generally like. I really liked that one. I already forgot the name of it. Came out a couple years ago. Overlord? Yeah, Overlord. I liked that. Yeah. That one was pretty good. I enjoyed that. And then actually a movie that I rewatched during Halloween was Frankenstein's Army, which was it's criminally underrated. It's a found footage horror movie that takes place in World War II. And Frankenstein is creating Nazi super soldiers, and they're all like these crazy, like mutated creatures. What a fun movie that was. Nobody talks about that movie, and I thought it was like, it's like when you watch that movie, it feels like you're going through a haunted house. That's what it feels like to me.
Gotcha.
Really fun. Anyway, this was like not really on that same level. So yeah, I can't really recommend Blood Vessel, but it is, if you have Shudder, it is on there, so you can just check it out if you have a Shudder subscription. Not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be an absolute train wreck, but it was just
it almost would have been perhaps more enjoyable if it was at least more entertaining.
All right, let's take a look at what we have coming out on VOD this week. On the 24th, we have Fat Man. This is the one with Mel Gibson and Walton Goggins, where Mel Gibson plays Santa Claus. It's an action. It's an action movie. It says Santa Claus is forced into a partnership with the U.S. military. Making matters worse, he gets locked into a deadly battle of wits against a highly skilled assassin hired by a precocious 12-year-old after receiving a lump of coal in his stocking. 'Tis the season for Fat Man to get even in the action comedy that keeps on giving.
Good God.
And this is a Saban Films release, if you couldn't tell. You should start to see a pattern with these Saban films. Also on the 24th, we have The Walrus and the Whistleblower. This is a documentary about a guy who became known as the Walrus Whisperer.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Trying to save this walrus from like Marineland or one of those, like, yeah, it is Marineland, actually. I was right. Got One Night in San Diego. That's a comedy. Is there a tagline? Nope. We got Saul and Ruby's Holocaust Survivor Band. It's a documentary. I think the title says it all. We have Getting to Know You. That's a comedy from the looks of it. Rom-com, maybe. Buddy Games. This is another Saban Films starring Josh Duhamel, Dax Shepard, and Olivia Munn. And the guy from Psych is in there, and then the one guy from Entourage. So it's a raunchy comedy.
Oh yeah.
About a bunch of best friends who do these like dangerous games with each other every year or something. Looks hilarious.
Oh man.
Looks like it's just chock full of raunchy fun. On the 26th, we have Vinyl Generation. This is a documentary about Czechoslovakia and the alternative culture that sprung up there.
Huh.
Which actually, feeds in a bit to our movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew?
Connections. On the 27th, that's Friday, right? Yep. We have Kill It and It Will Leave This Town. This is a virtual theatrical release. Polish surrealist animation. Seems like something you'd be really into. Actually, we talked about this offline a bit.
Yes.
Looks pretty interesting. And then finally we have Princess of the Row. This is also on the 27th.
Okay.
On Blu-ray this week, we have Mad Max coming out in 4K. That's the 1979 original. We have The Beastmaster from 1982 coming out in 4K. Wonder Boys from 2000. Train to Busan presents Peninsula.
Yep.
We got He Came from the Swamp, the William Greffey collection. This is a box set that includes 6 movies, including Sting of Death, Death Curse of Tartu, The Hooked Generation, The Psychedelic Priest, The Naked Zoo, and Mako, Jaws of Death, and Whiskey Mountain.
Oh yeah, Whiskey Mountain.
Big box set there for you to enjoy. We got Libeled Lady from 1936. We got The Pirate from 1948. We're No Angels from 1955. Deadly Games from 1989. What is this? Is this the yeah, this is the dial code. What is it called? Dial code Santa Claus? Yeah, it's also known as Deadly Games. It's the one that's like basically a precursor to Home Alone, the French movie.
Okay.
Definitely recommend that if you haven't seen that yet. It's a hoot. And it's like clearly they ripped off of this movie for Home Alone, but all right, what else do we have here? Ava from earlier this year. That's the one with Jessica Chastain. Cemetery of Terror from 1985. The Jewish Soul, the classics of Yiddish cinema. That's a Kino release. This is 10 movies spanning from 1935 to 1949.
Okay.
Iron Mask from earlier this year. This is the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jackie Chan. Very strange looking release. Cinema Paradiso from 1988. This is another this is an Arrow release, an Arrow Academy release. Blood Games from 1990, which I believe I just saw Blood Games, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Just saw that. That's the one about the softball players. I enjoyed that. I'd recommend that. Didn't know that was coming out on Blu-ray. All I Can Say, which is that rock doc about Blind Melon. And then we have Getting to Know You and The Walrus and the Whistleblower coming out on Blu-ray as well. What about Criterion's this week?
Oh, we got 2. One of them is a big boy. That's the Essential Fellini box set. Got 14 Cinemax spectacles in there with, all sorts of packaging and special features and all that good stuff. Just tons of stuff. And then The Irishman. Scorsese's The Irishman getting released as well.
Got a good cover.
Yeah, and a bunch of special features.
It looks like the Fellini ones are maybe being released individually as well, because I'm seeing them listed on Blu-ray.com separately as well. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So if you just want to pick up like one or two of them, looks like they are being released individually, at least.
Yeah, if you're a wuss and you can't commit to 14,
Just go for just dive in, man. Just take the plunge.
where are you going? You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be. Just fucking get them delivered to your house. Watch them. You have 14 movies. You've got plenty of time. Fellini marathon.
Hell yeah. All right. I think that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. You can send us your questions and topics to podcast@filmpulse.net. You can follow us on Twitter @filmpulsenet and @filmpulsekevin. If you have a minute, consider reviewing us on iTunes. That would be very helpful. For Kevin Rakestraw, my name's Adam Patterson. We'll see you next week.